Poor old Luke Rockhold got laid out again. And yeah, Dylan Dallas picked up a win, won a belt against a guy with one MMA fight. Though it has been quite fun pointing out to people that Dylan Dallas, Gordon Ryan couldn't submit him in his prime. People have been arguing about what Gordon's prime is, but before he took Herculean amounts of roids and bulked up to over 99 kilos, he was in the more competitive under 88 kilos category. And the year that he won that, 2017, he submitted Craig, Keenan, Romulo, Cyborg, and the two people he couldn't submit were Sanjay Hibero, who has not been submitted by anyone, I don't think, in a very, very long time. Maybe Roger once. Nobody's even passed his guard in years. And old Dildo Dennis. Honestly, that match is quite good if you go watch it again. There's a little bit of Dennis, like his second match with Gary Tonin, where he's happy to not be submitted or scored on, and he's just wagging his finger. It's like, go out and get some fucking points. We can see you're good at this. Why don't you make the effort? But then that's been the story of his life. He was good at this. And by being a dick and getting a bit of the McGregor, getting the bite from McGregor, he blew it. Well, I say blew it, but he's managed to make a career out of it. Ariel Helwani is still getting him on and giving him clicks and attention and follows for his awful blue tick Twitter. But anyway, let's talk about these fights this weekend because they're pretty bloody good. We'll start with Imavov versus Caio Borralho. I've been watching these guys' fights this week. I was going to write something and then I ended up writing about Hussein Cater instead. Caio Borralho, I've liked him since the Contender Series. I can say that, but he's one of the very few fighters I can say that because this was the period where I was watching the Contender Series. Him, Jailton Almeida, Jack Della Maddalena, watched them all come through and fuck all else. But Borralho, he took 2 runs at the Contender Series, and it was very obvious that he was sort of like a Machida clone. He fights southpaw, he has the high lead hand, the low rear hand, and he likes to try and intercept people with the counter left straight. And until the Jared Cannonier fight, which was his last fight, that was the case. So he does a lot of that. He does a very long, reaching double leg, the sort of GSP bend at the waist double leg, which can look awful. He did it against Abus Magomedov, and Magomedov read it, and he just face planted into the mat. But when he times it well, and the guy doesn't see it, it works very well. And his grappling is quite fun. He hits a few giggler sweeps, which I love. A decent all-round grappler. Trains with Damian Maya. When ADCC rolls around, he gets Melky Galval's boys down there. And he's the top guy at the Fighting Nerds. He seems to study people and plan for them quite well. And he beat Mikhail Alexijuk back in 2023. Alexichuk's gone to them, and he says that he's like really benefiting from hanging out with them. So he's been leading the charge to the UFC for the Fighting Nerds. He's not got as much attention as John Silver, Ruffy, Praches, because they've all been smoking people every time out. He's got a couple of stoppages. He's had a couple of slower ones. I think everyone was very impressed with his performance against Cannonier. I think we're clear that Cannonier is on the downward slope now, very much so. But Borralho, yeah. Well, actually, no, to be fair, because I think it was like 2-2 going into the 5th. Borralho was getting clubbed a bit, and it was to do with the fact that he wanted to box. He was trying to get more boxing off. So he's lunging with these big jabs in his sort of karate stance and jabbing, and then he's assuming the shoulder roll position afterwards. High rear hand, high lead shoulder, low lead hand. And it was quite interesting to watch it work because when Cannonier threw his right hand, because this is an open stance a lot of the time, but Borralho is southpaw. Borralho is always southpaw. He doesn't switch very much. Cannonier does switch. When Cannonier would throw his right hand, whether it was an overhand right from orthodox, or actually much better when he switched to southpaw, he could go between the jab and the right hook, the lead right hook. And it was giving Borralho fits, as it should, because that's the side where only his hand can protect him. He's got to react. He's got to read it. He's got to do work. And you're much more fallible on that side than when Cannonier stood southpaw and started throwing left hands, which is what he did in the 4th and 5th. And those were the ones, when he started throwing left hands, either southpaw or orthodox, Borralho was able to start rolling them and coming back with counters. And it took until round 4, and then he started landing them well. And just before the finish, he lands a decent left hand on the counter off a shoulder roll, and he comes in with a good 1-2, stuns him. Sorry, it wasn't a finish, but like the end of the fight where Dan Miragliotta let Cannonier slump in one of the most slumpy of slumps I've ever seen. But he did make it to the decision, so fair play to him. But yeah, that sort of last sequence, it was all set up by the fact that Cannonier was throwing his left hand now, which Borralho could take on his lead shoulder and throw back. So I do like that as an extension of that karate style, because the karate style is going to get you in and out with one punch or get you in for one punch. And the problem has always been like, what do you do after that? I've been watching a guy called Felix Klinkhammer, which is a hilarious name this week. I was trying to watch more prospects. I'm sort of scouting some guys now and having a look just because it was a slow week. And Klinkhammer, I might do a film room on like 3 of them. But Klinkhammer is a welterweight out of London Shoot Fighters, and his coach, or one of his coaches, is MVP. And he was a grappler, but he's adopted the MVP style. If you watch him fight, he's got both hands down. He's doing all the MVP looks. And you'd think that being able to create distance and explode in and connect, and intercept people and run through them would really help get people down. But there's a really obvious switch between when he's trying to strike and when he's trying to grapple. He hasn't been able to mix it well. Whereas MVP, when he throws a punch, he does his big intercepting punch. He then like crashes into the guy, steps behind their lead leg and pushes them as hard as he can. And a lot of the time they just stumble back, because their leg gets free. But sometimes they fall over. But that's a really good way to prevent the opponent coming back on you. Whereas I'm watching Klinkhammer try and intercept the guy with his right hand, and then he just has to throw his double forearms up while he's standing in front of the guy trying to get out the side, and gets clipped a couple of times. So having something that you can then build off those big interceptions and big distance closes from the point fighting style, really useful and an underexplored area, I would say. Being able to dart in with a big jab, smack the guy in the nose, and then stand there saying, I know something's coming back, and take it on the shoulder and counter again. Really powerful if you can make it work. And he did in the 4th and 5th rounds against Cannonier. It wasn't super clean. It wasn't as clean as when he normally strikes, which is very low output, low risk. To do this, as with any sort of fighting where you want to be close enough to land more than one punch, you have to take risks. You are putting yourself in the firing line. This is why I'm always saying, like, the offensive counterpuncher and the pressure fighter are the most, they're most spectacular styles, but they're also going to be the ones that finish top flight opponents the most, because you're putting yourself in danger, but you're putting them in danger, and you're making the amount of danger much greater. You could win 100 fights by being William Gomez and standing on the back foot, but you're not going to finish that many people, especially at the high levels. If you want to finish people at high levels, you've got to get in their face and cook them and make mistakes, which is kind of antithetical to the point fighting base. So it's interesting to see Caio operating that sort of style and trying to make it work. His jab has looked sensational, because he does a lot of work just to land the jab with all his footwork. Normally, point fighters gravitate towards the rear hand, the reverse punch, the gyakuzuki, just because if you're doing all that work to get one shot in, you might as well try and take their head off. But Caio's doing it with his jab, and it was working really well. And I'm very interested to see how that proceeds. In Imavov, he's meeting a guy who has fought. I mean, it's quite interesting how I'm always talking about Chris Weidman's run at middleweight and how he met like 9 southpaws in a row. And that was just the makeup of the division. Like the top 10 were all southpaws except him. But then I'm looking at Nasruddin Imavov. Israel Adesanya is a switch hitter. Cannonier does switch a bit. But Delidze, Allen, Strickland, Buckley southpaw, Shabazian, Heinich, Hawes, lots of orthodox fighters in there. To see him fight like a full-time southpaw, you have to look at the Curtis fight, which is 2023. And honestly, I thought he handled it quite well. My criticism of Imavov has always been that he retreats on a straight line a bit too much. If you watch his fight with Buckley, he's always like he's so much taller and longer, and he's using his weapons so much better. But he does do a lot of like, oh, Buckley's running at me again, I'll just back up. And sometimes he hits the fence and you go, oh, and luckily Buckley doesn't actually capitalize on it very well. But generally, his control of distance, and even with the added hand fight of southpaw versus orthodox, he was doing great work against Curtis. Jabs and 1-2s, excellent work, occasionally led with his right straight. What I really liked in that fight was how he was sort of crashing into clinches and using them against Curtis. 'Cause Curtis has very good takedown defense and ability to get up. He's like Strickland in that regard. He's fought some good wrestlers and not been taken down. But in that fight, Curtis is going to the shoulder roll and he's dropping the lead hand, southpaw shoulder roll, which is what we're interested in this matchup. And there's a moment where Imavov jabs in and just sort of like crashes into him, uses his hand behind Curtis's lead elbow to just make sure it's past his chest, and then presses his chest into the back of that elbow, and he has the back. It's basically an elbow pass from wrestling, but in striking, because his elbow's down against his body. You just need to get behind that elbow and stick to him, and then you're on his back, basically. And that's what happened. So that was really, really interesting. But the crashes to the clinch did end up causing the headbutt cut and the no contest. But I think he would have probably continued to handily win. I mean, Curtis has had some comeback wins, but once you've seen Chris Curtis, provided you're not going to gas out horribly in round 3, it was only a 3-round fight. And I've seen Imavov work well in the 4th round of fights, so I doubt he was going to gas out horribly, but he was pretty much styling on him. Obviously, coming off a big knockout against Israel Adesanya, I think helped along by Adesanya being long in the tooth now. He's had 2 of the weirdest fights in middleweight history in his recent run, because he had that fight with Dolidze where Dolidze just got scared and couldn't do anything except hold him, and then proceeded to hold him against the cage for long periods. And then, like, one card gave it as a draw, which was crazy. And then the fight against Brendan Allen, who also came up against is this subset of guy who thinks he's well-rounded, and then meets the one genuinely well-rounded middleweight, and goes, "Oh no, I'm not well-rounded," and just spirals out. And Brendan Allen was like pulling guard on him. Bizarre, but I think in this one I have confidence in Imavov in the Southpaw versus Orthodox matchup. I've not seen him against too many long Southpaws. You know, Curtis is much shorter than him, but he did well against Izzy, and he didn't do particularly badly when Izzy went Southpaw. Obviously, caught him on the switch to get the finish in that fight, but he was doing good work up to that point. Caio will switch, but he tends to do it out of range, and he tends to do it only for little bits, and he tends to do it mainly to land the calf kick, which has landed really well for a couple of Imavov's opponents against him. I feel like this is a fight where, and this is the tricky part of trying to improve while fighting the best fighters possible. I talked about it with Charles Johnson learning to fight Southpaw, and Max Holloway is my great example. You know, it took 3 years while he was climbing the featherweight ranks, doing like the meat of his climb up the featherweight ranks. He was playing around Southpaw, and then went back to Orthodox when he won the title. But to experiment with new things while also advancing your career, I think this is why some guys like Marlon Vera and Charles Oliveira benefit from a step back in competition and fight a few lesser known names, or less competent fighters for a while, because you have the confidence to try new things, and you sort of get insulated from the bad outcomes by the lower level of opposition. If Caio Borralho comes out against Imavov and he wants to try and continue operating the sort of jabbing into counterboxing game, the offensive counterboxing game that he was trying against Cannonier, he's doing it against a really dangerous opponent, and he's only done it once before, and he got hit a load doing it. I would honestly, if you wanted to look at this from the tactical, strategic outlook, I would say put the boxing on the back burner, fight long, keep the engagements limited. If you see him entering, try and intercept him with either the left straight or the left knee. On the outside, kick away at his feet, change stances to get that closed stance, outside calf kick, and mix in wrestling as you can. Both these guys pepper in their wrestling in between, but I have a feeling he'll be more game to box with Imavov. For Imavov, I would say make a priority of dealing with the calf kick, because this is a guy who will actually notice that you had trouble with it previously. By had trouble, he wasn't limping, but he was not checking them, which is not good. When you're not checking them and you're not countering them and you're not withdrawing your leg from them, when you're just sort of taking them and going, oh, okay, right, now I'm back to my stance and I'll get back to work. I feel like Imavov's the stronger wrestler, but maybe that's just because I'm fresh off watching him ragdoll Cyril Gane. That's the saddest fucking shit. Cyril Gane is a really good striker, and I genuinely do believe that he could beat Tom Aspinall and make everything really uncomfortable. But I'm watching him spar with Imavov and get double-legged and get spiraled around and double-legged in big gloves. and he's got like 70 pounds on Imavov. So, not great. I do wonder what Imavov's